Hey guys, today we step into a world of soot-stained walls, bubbling cauldrons, and the gentle panic of not setting the thatch roof on fire. Welcome to the medieval kitchen, a place where spices are precious, spoons are optional, and if you can't take the heat, well, too bad, because there's no chimney to let it out. You probably won't survive this, honestly. Not unless you enjoy eye-watering smoke, open flames, and food safety protocols that basically amount to hope for the best. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, let's walk through the heavy wooden door, step onto the packed earth floor, and take a long, breathless inhale. Smoke, salt, grease, ash. Beneath the low beams, the air hangs thick with centuries of use. There's a hearth at the center, wide, stone-lined, and blackened by generations of fire. This is not the quaint, Pinterest-worthy kitchen you might imagine. This is heat, labor, and survival. A pot bubbles over with something grayish and mysterious. It might be pottage, thickened with barley or oats, flavored with leeks, garlic, and whatever root vegetable didn't rot in the cellar. There's probably no meat unless a goose has died of natural causes or a feast day is approaching. Most of the time, the protein comes from beans or maybe a small fish, dried and salted so aggressively it could serve as roofing material. Near the wall, an iron hook hangs from a rafter beam, swinging slightly as someone stirs a hanging pot. There's no ventilation, just a tiny window, shuttered against the wind and unglazed, letting in light and a biting draft. The smoke has no place to go, so it curls upward and seeps into everything. The walls, the clothes, the bread, the very bones of the place. And here's where it gets quirky. Despite the stifling smoke, most medieval kitchens didn't actually have chimneys until the 12th or 13th century. And even then, they were rare, expensive, and slow to spread. Instead, smoke was left to waft up through a hole in the ceiling, if you were lucky, or just fill the room like a fog machine at a Black Plague disco. Some cooks carried small hand fans, not to cool themselves, but to waft the smoke toward the nearest crack in the timber. You might think the hearth would be tucked against a wall, out of the way. Nope. In many early medieval homes, it squats right in the middle of the room, commanding all attention. It's the center of everything: cooking, heat, light, and occasional mild panic. Children are shooed away constantly. Pets skirt the edges, hoping for scraps, while trying not to catch fire. Above the hearth, a wooden beam serves as a makeshift shelf, lined with clay pots and leather flasks. Herbs hang drying from the rafters: sage, thyme, parsley, nettles. A few onions, their skins papery and brittle, dangle like rustic ornaments. They're not just for cooking, they keep the mice away. Historians still argue whether the open hearth served more as a communal symbol or purely a utilitarian device. Some point to its centrality in both domestic architecture and spiritual life. Fires were never supposed to go out, and embers were passed between neighbors like sacred relics. Others argue it was just the most practical way to heat a room when your walls are made of wattle and your roof leaks like a gossip. There's a distinct choreography to the space. A woman, maybe the mother, maybe a maidservant, reaches into a wooden tub of grain, feeling with practiced hands for stones or insects. She turns to grab a clay jug of water drawn from the well that morning. The water isn't exactly clean, but it's better boiled. Always boiled. Sometimes flavored with herbs, or better yet, ale. Small beer, low in alcohol, safer than the well and less dull than plain water. A dog barks outside, a child yells, something thuds in the pantry, and through it all, the kitchen hums like a heart, beating not just with heat and hunger, but rhythm. Morning porridge, midday bread, evening stew. It doesn't change much. It doesn't need to. These routines survive wars, famines, plagues. In wealthier homes, manors or castles, the kitchen is separated from the main hall, often located in an outbuilding or wing. Still no chimney, just a bigger fire, more servants, and better cuts of meat. There's even an early kind of cookbook, more like a scroll of suggested dishes for feasts. One might include things like stewed lamprey or spiced rabbit pie, ingredients you will definitely not find in the peasant pot. But rich or poor, you still have the same core tools. A three-legged cauldron, a ladle, a knife that doubles as fork, and a wooden bowl so worn it has more personality than some landlords. No fancy spice racks, but there's salt if you're lucky, and mustard seeds, crushed into a paste with vinegar and stored in a tiny wooden box, used mostly to disguise the taste of whatever has begun to spoil. This is not a clean kitchen by modern standards, but it's not chaotic either. Everything has its place, every stain has a story, every burn mark is a lesson in timing. There's a rhythm to the daily grind, and it starts long before the sun does. The kitchen wakes in darkness, with the first to rise, stumbling across cold earth floors and coaxing breath back into the embers from the night before. No matches, no lighters, just patience, dry kindling, and the occasional whispered prayer. Fire is not a convenience. It's a lifeline. Lose it, and you're not eating. You might not be living either. By dawn, the fire is roaring again, and the kitchen stretches awake. Dough is already rising in the corner, covered by a damp cloth and weighted with a wooden board to keep the flies off. Not white bread, not unless you're feeding a noble. This is maslin, a gritty, dense mix of rye and barley, sometimes wheat if the harvest was kind. Dark, coarse, filling. The kind of bread you chew for half an hour and still swallow with effort. But it keeps the belly full and the bowels regular, which is more than you can say for the stream water. The grinding of grain hums low in the background. A quern stone turns slowly, one person holding the upper wheel steady while another feeds in kernels. It's a job for children or servants, backbreaking, rhythmic, boring, but essential. Flour doesn't make itself. And pre-ground anything? Forget it. You grind, or you go hungry. Now the cauldron is back on the hook. It never really leaves. They just change the contents. Today's pottage might include peas and leeks, yesterday's scraps of bacon rind, and whatever herbs they've gathered. It's not a recipe so much as a tradition of making do, and it's not bad if you don't think about it too hard. In the corner, there's a wooden trough for dough kneading, double tasking, as a baby cradle when times are tight. Beside it, the milk bucket, freshly drawn, unpasteurized, already starting to separate. If it lasts long enough, it might become cheese. If it doesn't, it'll become something else, and someone will still probably eat it. Waste is a modern luxury. In the medieval kitchen, even mold had a role to play. Let's talk utensils, because, well, there aren't many. A long-handled iron ladle, a sharp, heavy knife passed down and sharpened until it's no more than a sliver. Spoons if you're lucky, wooden trenchers carved from a block and used until they crack. Plates, if you're noble. Otherwise, you're using half a loaf of stale bread as your dish, soaking up the juices and then, yes, eating the plate. Eco-friendly before it was trendy. And pots, big iron ones, suspended over flame, swung on a pot crane if your kitchen is advanced enough. If not, it just dangles by a chain and hope. One wrong move and the stew's on the floor, or worse, the fire. You laugh, but fire-based injuries were common, and burns in an age before antibiotics were a serious matter. Scars on hands and forearms marked the seasoned cooks from the newbies. Even more fascinating, the role of taste. Medieval palates weren't dull, they just had a very different idea of delicious. Spices were everything. Cinnamon, clove, black pepper, and nutmeg were worth their weight in silver. Not because they made food better, though they did, but because they showed off status. If your stew tasted like spice, it meant you had power. If it tasted like turnip, it meant you had turnips. Salt was essential, not only for flavor, but preservation. Meat was salted until it resembled something between jerky and punishment. Fish too, especially in religious households, where fasting days meant no red meat for nearly half the year. This gave rise to creative substitutions. Almond milk, for example, appears in many upper-class cookbooks, not as a plant-based alternative, but as a way to fake milk during fasts. Made by soaking crushed almonds in water and straining it through linen, it was luxurious, creamy, and wildly impractical for a poor family. And yes, there were cookbooks, sort of. Manuscripts passed between nobles or monasteries, handwritten and illustrated, often filled with elaborate dishes no commoner would ever attempt. Roast peacock redressed in its own feathers, hedgehog stew, pastries shaped like castles. These weren't just meals, they were performances. Power on a plate. But back in the average kitchen, there are no peacocks, just lentils, maybe onions, a handful of herbs, bread to sop it all up, and a thin ale to wash it down, brewed weak enough to hydrate, but strong enough to stay clean. Children drink it too. It's safer than the water and more filling than prayers. And above all this, above the smoke and the stew and the steady ache in every spine, there's the knowledge that this meal matters. Because tomorrow the fire might not relight, the flour might run out, the Lord might raise the grain tax again, the child might get sick, but tonight the hearth is burning and the pot is full. For now. The fire cracks low, glowing in the half-light of early evening. Outside, the air cools fast, creeping through the door's wooden slats, teasing the smoke that lingers like a second ceiling. Inside, it's warm in that thick, sticky way, the kind that clings to your clothes and hair, especially if you've been stirring pottage for an hour straight. There's laughter now, quiet and tired. Someone scraped the crusty bottom from the pot, arguably the best bite of the day. A pig's trotter, charred at the edge, gets passed around as a treat. Children chew on the bone with determined reverence. This isn't just food, it's reward. Proof that the fire worked, the flour held, and nothing caught fire. Except the meat, and that was intentional. Sort of. In the background, you might hear a creaking sound. The spit, turning slowly. If you're wealthy enough to own meat and a spit boy, or more likely, a spit dog, one of the more bizarre medieval kitchen quirks, then you're in luck. Certain breeds were trained to walk on a wheel that turned the roast slowly over the fire. Imagine a furry treadmill, but with pork at stake. The Tudors loved this. It's less known now, but it existed. And some historians still argue whether these turnspit dogs were a common fixture or a novelty confined to upper-class households with more ambition than empathy. Meanwhile, the kitchen smells of many things: rosemary, ash, iron, the sour tang of fermenting ale. You'd think the scent would be unpleasant, but it's surprisingly comforting, like old wool or cracked leather. Familiar. Lived in. There's a humanity to this grime. Across the room, the wall is stained with years of smoke trails and finger marks. There's no paint, just bare plaster, and perhaps a crude fresco drawn in soot. Someone's child, perhaps, or the Virgin Mary, depending on the household's leanings. Icons were common. Sacred images meant to bless the food and ward off spoilage, or rats, or worse. Near the door sits the salt cupboard, a small carved wooden chest where the salt is kept under lock and key. Salt isn't just seasoning, it's power, it's trade, it's rent if you're unlucky. Salted herring is currency in some places. And if you were wondering whether salt was ever taxed, the answer is, of course. Everything useful was taxed, including ovens. Yes, ovens. That rarest of domestic beasts. Most homes didn't have them. Too expensive, too dangerous, too complicated. Communal bakehouses served the village, with a designated oven keeper who charged by the loaf. Some lords even monopolized baking entirely, forcing peasants to pay a fee just to heat their daily bread. And if you dared to sneak a bake in your own hearth, fines, public shame, possibly worse, depending on the mood of your local reeve. So, most people got creative. Flatbreads cooked on hot stones, griddle cakes over coals, ash bread even, dough baked right in the embers, dusted clean, and eaten with the same hands that made it. And still, there's that ever-present smoke. It curls, it seeps, it invades. It blackens the beams and hollows the eyes. Long exposure leads to housemaid's cough, a chronic rasping that many kitchen workers lived with. No one called it that, of course. They just coughed and got back to chopping. One particularly fringe belief recorded in the 14th century herbal texts claimed that kitchen smoke, specifically from burning rosemary and juniper, could purify the lungs and keep disease at bay. The line between cooking and medicine blurred easily. If it smelled bad enough, it might heal you, or kill the rats, or summon a saint, or just keep the flies away, which might have been miracle enough. The kitchen was also the heart of many medicinal experiments. A bowl of crushed nettles for inflammation, a syrup of honey and vinegar for cough, a poultice of warm ale and crushed beans to draw out infection, all concocted in the same cauldron that cooked your dinner. Hygiene, as we understand it, wasn't the goal. Practical survival was. And through all this, gender held the rhythm. Women ran the kitchens. Daughters watched their mothers. Servants obeyed their mistresses. Recipes were passed not on parchment, but in muscle memory. How long to knead by feel when the broth smelled right? How many sprigs of thyme was too many? Men might roast meat in noble households or handle the fire, but the true alchemy, the transformations of raw to edible, bitter to bearable, belong to the women. There's a soft shuffle as someone moves toward the hearth, tosses in a few sticks of alderwood, and stirs the coals. The fire answers with a hiss, sending up a new cloud of smoke. The smell deepens, bread crust crackles, a copper ladle clangs to the floor, and just for a moment, the kitchen holds its breath. Then the rhythm resumes. Scrape, stir, grind, ladle, chew, laugh, cough, breathe. Outside, dusk presses its palms against the small, glassless windows. A draft curls through the doorway, lifting the smoke like a living thing. The fire flares briefly, casting shadows that dance across the packed earth floor and illuminate the gleam of copper pots strung from wooden pegs. There's no pantry, not in the way we think of one. Instead, food storage is more a matter of where you can keep something safe from rats, rot, and your neighbor's hungry fingers. The last embers sigh beneath a cracked pot, now empty, its bottom browned with the memory of stewed onions and barley. A hand reaches out blindly to smother what glow remains under a mound of ash. Fire must rest too. The kitchen, if we can still call it that, becomes a ghost of smells. Charred root, wet linen, the bitter iron of smoke. But before true sleep settles over the home, one final task, the bread for tomorrow. By the light of a rush-dip candle, flour is weighed by eye, not measure. A jug of warm water is mixed in, thickening slowly with elbow, wrist, and prayer. No yeast in sight, just wild fermentation from a bowl scratched with years of invisible microbes. Some call it God's leaven, others simply call it sour. The dough is pressed into a flat round and wrapped in cloth to rise somewhere vaguely warm, near the coals if they're kind, or tucked under straw if not. In monasteries, this moment takes a different shape. Rows of white-robed bakers knead in silence, lit by oil lamps, their hands moving in perfect rhythm. Here the kitchen is a sacred extension of the chapel. Meals are offered up, not just served. The rule of Saint Benedict prescribes moderation, not indulgence, and yet even in these austere surroundings, bread is beloved. The monastery oven, a great domed beast of clay and stone, radiates its own holiness. Elsewhere in Europe, perhaps in a tiny Provençal village or the wind-chilled corners of Denmark, kitchens follow local rhythms. In warmer climates, open courtyards serve as cook spaces. Meals bubble in ceramic pots over low fires, surrounded by fig trees and humming flies. In colder regions, families huddle near hearths recessed into deep walls, the fire their only friend against the long dark. And yet the feeling is the same. The kitchen, whether it's a damp hovel or a tiled noble hearth, holds the same heartbeat. Time in medieval kitchens isn't tracked by clocks. It's told in ladlefuls, in rising steam, in the slow shifting of the sun across a smoky ceiling. The daily ritual of cooking is as much about survival as it is about memory. A daughter learns to knead from her mother. A boy learns to gut a fish beside his grandfather. And everyone, no matter their station, learns to fear spoiled meat, love warm bread, and respect the flame. What's strange, perhaps even beautiful, is how little these kitchens relied on precision. No timers, no thermostats, no recipes penned in exact grams. Yet still, people ate. They cooked by scent, by texture, by sound. You knew the stew was ready when it stopped spitting and began whispering. You knew the fire was right when the underside of the pot glowed like a setting sun. Quirks abounded, of course. In parts of northern France, it was common to sprinkle flour in a circle around the hearth to keep out spirits. In Saxony, some cooks believed that tossing onion peels into the fire would reveal lies at the dinner table. Whether these were rituals or just rural boredom spun into superstition, historians still debate. What's certain is that kitchens held more than food. They held stories. And as the years crept into centuries, and the chimney finally arrived to banish the smoke upward, the medieval kitchen slowly evolved. Brick ovens replaced open fires. Iron stoves crept into city homes. Chimneys reached skyward like spires of domestic ambition, but something essential, was left behind in the ashes. A rawness, a closeness to the act of making, of feeding, of gathering. So tonight, as you tap on your sleek electric stove or preheat an oven that sings to you, take a moment to imagine the smoke. Feel the sting in your eyes, the ache in your knees. Picture the fire licking at soot-black beams while a loaf of barley bread cracks in the rising heat. Listen for the creak of the stirring spoon, the clink of a clay bowl, the hush of hunger finally quieted. Because in the medieval kitchen, food wasn't convenience. It was ceremony, craft and gamble all rolled into one. And now the fire dims, the bowl is scraped clean, and outside, frost bites the eaves while the hearth holds its final glow. Sleep, soot black and soft, settles across the room.